Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the Britons and trying to figure out what exactly happened to the civilization in Age of Empires 2. So when Definitive Edition was first released, the Britons were actually a very strong contender in tournament games, and they were quite a respectable civilization on the ladder. Their archer play, fast castle timings, and generally smooth economy led them to be a force to be reckoned with. Their late game was also quite respected, since Warwolf Trebs combined with long-range foot archers like Arbalester and Longbowmen, combining that with halberdiers, was quite a solid composition and was very difficult to counterplay. Oftentimes you'd have to be able to kill Britons early with skirmishers or just try to raid them on the sides in late game, both of which was quite difficult to do because of how quickly the Britons were able to get the castle age. Now as far as this video goes, I'm going to leave it rather open-ended, so you can give me your thoughts in the comments as to what your experience with the Britons was. But for me, the downfall of Britons comes from a few major changes, and the downfall is definitely something that I recognize both at a personal level and also when taking a look at the statistics. Now there's a few reasons why the Britons have fallen out of popularity and have had their overall power level reduced. The first one I can think of is the very direct and obvious crossbow and arbalest nerfs. Crossbowman tech has been made more expensive, although in the recent patch it was made a tiny bit cheaper. Same goes with arbalest, but overall they still remain much more expensive than they were when DE first came out. And having the best unit for the Britons hit with a direct nerf is quite a big hit to the civilization. Britons is arguably one of the most reliant civilization when it comes to the foot archer line, and seeing a double nerf come through, one on the crossbow upgrade and one on the arbalest upgrade, leaves a sour taste in every Briton player's mouth. Now it's rather naive to consider the crossbowmen the only unit that Britons can go for. They of course have some decent other options. Their cavalry is somewhat okay, getting full upgrades minus of course paladin, hussar, and bloodlines, but otherwise it's passable, and they have really strong infantry play, getting both fully upgraded halbs and champions, including the new tech gambesons. But even with those factors in mind and some other units as options for the Britons, they still rely overall on the crossbow, and whether or not it got nerfed, the Briton player will still want to play crossbows more often than not. You get most of your bonuses there, getting the faster working ranges, and also getting the +1 range in Castle Age for free, and also the second +1 range in Imperial Age on your foot archer units make them a very juicy option to go for, and it's kind of what the civilization is known for. Besides the crossbow nerf though, there are a bunch of other factors that are less impactful but still very much worth noting, and that is the fact that walls have gotten weaker overall. So Drush Fast Castle is way harder to pull off. Your walls in Dark Age now have less HP, houses in Dark Age and Feudal Age have less armor and are more easily breakable, especially when considering scout rushes and villagers coming forward to break them down in tower rush, all of which makes fast castling or just slow turtle play with walls a lot harder to pull off. And that was pretty much one of the main playstyles for Britons. In fact, the most popular and most deadly strategy that the Britons were going for when DE first came out is the Drush Fast Castle, a strategy that has monumentally fallen off the face of the planet since all of these changes came through. Remember, the Expo nerf has a direct consequence on the Drush Fast Castle, as they usually try to get the crossbowman tech in early Castle Age, which has basically been made impossible now following those nerfs. And of course, having weaker walls just makes the Drush Fast Castle all that much easier to punish and probably not worth going for in most cases. On top of that though, the maps have been made more open. This is a very general thing that's happened across Age of Empires, and when it comes to the standard gens in Arabia, when it comes to certain tournament maps that are being played, in general, there are less trees, woodlands are further away, and the maps seem to have been made a little bit more open across the board. And this is just a general feeling I get that's also been backed up by some recent patch changes that I've read through. Every now and then they give us a patch and they change a few things about maps, and one thing that has definitely changed with Arabia is the fact that the maps are more open nowadays, which is another indirect hit to the Britons playstyle, which is usually to fast castle with crossbows, or at least to play a slow and defensive feudal age with archers and just try to wait and survive until Castle Age. Both of those strategies are now much weaker since the maps are more open, favoring cavalry play and more aggressive play in general. And the last thing I can think of is that skirm openings have been made more popular. The skirm spear rush, for example, is one of the recent meta shifts that has been coming through to our game. About a year ago, it's been made very popular again, and that's a really good way to shut down civs like Britons that really rely on their archer play. Not being able to drush fast castle means the Britons have to take feudal age head on in, I would say, 95% of their games. And if the Briton player is going into feudal age, you can basically assume they're going to be playing archers, or even if they play anything else like some militia, men at arm, or scouts, they want to eventually transition into archers, because since you're lacking bloodlines and since you don't have any bonuses for other units, you're very likely to come back to some kind of foot archer play, be it crossbowmen or longbows. And so skirmishers in general would be a very good way to shut down the Britons and prevent them from getting off to any kind of success with their foot archer units. On top of that, skirms have been given +1 attack against halberdier, so in late game when it comes to cavalry civs against Britons, skirm cav play or skirm hussar play has been made slightly better, since the skirms will take out the halbs a little bit quicker. Now, I still think the relationship is still in favor of the Halb foot archer player, but this is assuming that the Britons is on equal footing going into Imperial Age, which seems to hardly be the case. Now, for this video, I actually looked into some stats because I was really unaware if this was just a personal subjective feeling I had with the Britons or if this is something observable with the stats. And it turns out the stats are actually supporting everything I'm saying in this video so far. Let's go through them real quick. So for 1v1 games in 1900 elo or higher, the win rate for the Britons is at a 46.3%. This is quite low as most civs are hovering around 50 plus or minus 2%. Anything lower or higher than that is either too strong or too weak. And when it comes to the Britons, they find themselves in the bottom 10 civilizations with a 46.3 win rate at the highest level of the game. And this is not just for Arabia, by the way. This is everything ranked ladder, which for all intents and purposes is mostly Arabia, but there are some other maps. And it's clear as day that the Britons aren't shining on Arabia, nor are they shining on other maps, statistically speaking. And you might be thinking, listen, Hera, the top 1%, the 1900 elo plus players, they represent a fraction of our community. Maybe the Britons are performing better for the rest of the player base and the majority of the player base. It turns out the stats are actually even worse for the majority of the player base. From 1200 to 1900, which is, a decent majority, or at least a decent percentage of the ranked 1v1 players, Britain's win rate is sitting at a 45.8%, 0.5% less than at the highest level. And this will actually put them in the bottom 5 civs at 1200 to 1900 elo. And this is obviously quite a big shame because the Britons are actually performing better the higher up you go, but their numbers aren't really getting up that high. They still stay at their peak at a 46.3% at 1900 plus. So clearly the Britons are not performing well at the highest level, not performing well at, a good mid-range level like 1200 to 1900. And I don't have the stats for less than that, but I can imagine that the trend is the same because the lower you go, the easier it is to play with cavalry. And that's a general rule that I've observed through countless amounts of, countless hours of coachings and rec reviews. Cav just seems to perform better in lower levels, so I can't imagine the stats being suddenly in favor of Britons for 1200 and below players. So where does this leave Britons then? For 1v1s, I can give you some subjective feedback. What I've been doing with Britons is just playing them like a non-archer civ. This is to make it so I don't get hard counted by skirms at the start of the game. So I'd open something like scouts and play a little bit more defensive in early game and then try to transition into archers. Scouts into archers has become one of my favorite strategies, and I've actually done a video specifically on that and also done an in-depth video about that strategy on Patreon as well, going very heavy into the scouts into archers game plan. And I think it's one of the strategies that makes civs like Britons playable. You dodge the skirm threat in the early game because you open that stable and you can still get to archers later on. It seems like the best way to play the civilization. But I've also been experimenting in very defensive openings like going scouts, walling up, and trying to get my 3TC set up before I can test the map control. This is overall a risky playstyle, but it's made a little bit easier since the +1 range with the crossbows in Castle Age makes it so you can push back against siege using crossbow, which is very unique to the Britons and no other civilization can actually do that. So turtling up in early Castle Age doesn't leave you as vulnerable against a siege push as you might expect. But besides those two options, I really can't find a good way to play the Britons. Every single time I open archers with the Britons, it just feels like I'm not having any impact on the game and the skirms from my opponents would just counter me way too hard. And I'm not scaling particularly well into Castle Age anyways. Without bloodlines on my knights, I don't really have a good transition to defend myself against elite skirmisher. Sure, mangonels and scorpions are a decent option, but my opponents can just go for cavalry and skirm combo, and that usually beats out archer mangonel, at least in the open fields of Arabia. Now, even after making this video, it's unclear if any buffs should come through for the civilization, because there's one thing I haven't mentioned that is probably the saving grace for the civilization. Britons is still a highly dominant civ in team games, and it's widely recognized as a top 3 flank civ on any open map. And Britons also holds its own on closed maps like Black Forest and Arena, because it has a really strong late game with Werewolf Trebs with 17 range and splash damage, making an unstoppable death ball with 60 longbowmen and 40 halberdiers, and just controlling choke points very effectively. So be it on open maps with their archer play and really strong team bonus combined with really strong range, lets you kind of control the tempo of the game and put pressure on your opponent with very strong archer play, and then also controlling choke points in closed maps. They just feel like an overall very solid team game civilization. So if you suddenly buff the civ for 1v1s to kind of bring their win rate up, you're kind of potentially creating a monster in the team games. So even with all of these stats and even with all this personal experience kind of going against the Britons, I still find it hard to call for any buffs, and I'm really not sure what should be done with the civilization, even in theory. And that's why I want to leave it open-ended. I want you guys to give me your thoughts in the comments. What has your experience been with Britons, and do you think some changes should come through? How do you balance the disparity between, its strength in team games and its weakness in 1v1s? Some of you might think that this is perfectly fine. Not every civ has to be a good 1v1 civ, and that is obviously a very respectable approach as well. As for me personally, I don't mind having having Britons be a weak 1v1 civ. I've never been the biggest fan of Britons, but they do hold a special place in my heart because some of my first tournament wins on DE came from playing with the Britons, especially against guys like Viper who have struggled to beat in any form of tournament. And so they do kind of feel a little bit nostalgic in some way, but that's obviously just a feeling and not something to base any kind of changes on. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I hope you guys did enjoy the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care and peace. And hey, don't forget to check out my Patreon for exclusive guides and my Twitch live stream. Link in the description below.